welcome to my kitchen. My name is Hannah and I am a nutrition educator with Cornell Cooperative Extension of Jefferson County. And today I'm here for another video in our series, What Can I Cook With? Where each week I am bringing you a different seasonal vegetable and talking about some different ways that we can cook with them. So today's ingredient I'm really excited about. We have beets going on. So this was a kind of a fun surprise for me. I got home from vacation at about 3 a.m. this morning, and I was getting beets in my CSA box. And I was all ready and had a really great beet soup curry ready for us to go. And then instead I got these lovely candy striped beets instead of the red beets I was expecting. So we had a little bit of a change of plans, and I'm going to show you a really delicious salad, which I think it's going to be even better because it's really, really hot here in my house and I don't have to use the stove as much. So let me go ahead and show you what I mean by candy striped. So these beets are not as common. They're harder to find in the supermarket, so you may see them in farmers market or farm stands. But when you cut off the root like that, it's got this really pretty stripe in the center and these concentric rings. So these ones are a lot sweeter than your red beets, and so they're going to be great raw. We're going to slice them really thin and put them in a great salad with some carrots. So to prepare your beets, if you're going to be eating them raw, go ahead and take off the root like I just did, and then I like to peel them using just a vegetable peeler here. Just go ahead and take it off. This peeling method works really well on golden beets or the red purple beets as well. It makes it really easy. You don't have as much of a mess. A lot of times if you're roasting beets, the skins will slip off really easily. This one's great. The nice thing about the candy beets, the candy striped beets, is you don't have to worry about the juices staining your hand as much because they're not as juicy, and you can see a lot of them are this whiter color. So then I'm going to want this sliced into thin slices. You could use a mandolin if you have one. I'm just going to go ahead and use a knife and cut them as thin as I can. I like to leave the beet greens on. It gives me something to grip onto. It can be a little bit tricky if you don't have the beet greens. You could maybe use a fork, kind of stab it in the back here and use that to stabilize it a little bit more. So again, just some nice, thin layers. We're going to be adding like a vinegar dressing to this, so that will help soften these beets up a little bit. Beets, like radishes, sometimes have a little bit of kind of a spicy flavor, depending on how young they are, how ripe they are. And the vinegar will help take that out and make them a little bit softer. And actually, this is perfect because I'm actually going to cut these up so I have smaller pieces. In candy striped beets, you can see even within one beet, there's some variation. So I've got these really intense pink ones, and then these ones are more of the whiter color. So that's about all I'm going to get before it gets too tough. I'm going to save my beet greens for something later on, and this part can go into the compost or trash. These are my beet greens. I'm going to save them for later. So one of the ways you can tell at the grocery store or the farmer's market if it's a candy striped bean or a candy striped beet or a red beet is by looking at the stems. You can see they have this kind of stripedness there. Usually, though, it will be labeled, but that's one way you can tell without cutting into them. So that is one of the things I really like about getting a CSA box is it is a little bit of excitement each week about what's actually going to be in it. This is a fun find to be able to get these candy striped beets. So all versions of beets are really delicious and a good source of fiber and manganese, which is a mineral that our body needs, B vitamins, and folate. And they also have some compounds in them which help reduce high blood pressure. I'm just going to kind of break these up a little bit. Make sure they're not sticking together too much. And then I'm going to start on a dressing. I'll set these aside for now. So the base of my dressing is going to be some olive oil, which is a good source of unsaturated fats, which are heart-healthy fats. And then I'm going to also use some curry powder. So I'm using lemon curry for this recipe. You could use whatever curry powder you have. If you like the flavor, it will be good on this. I like the lemon curry powder because it has a little bit of lemony in it. And it's just something a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a 1/4 cup of olive oil into my little saucepan here. And then I'm going to add in 1 tablespoon of this lemon curry. So I know I talk on here a lot about using your local produce, but spices are another great product that I've been seeing in a lot more towns and cities is a local spice shop. So that's a great way to support your community as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add this in. Then I'm just going to turn it on low, and we're going to bring it to a simmer. Just mixing it up, making sure that the spices are all infused in the olive oil. This will prevent them from burning. So this functions similarly to if you ever toast your spices, kind of warming them in olive oil or another type of heart-healthy oil will blossom them and really bring out their flavors. So especially if you're buying really high-quality spices, you want to get the most flavor out of them as possible and really take advantage of the amazing quality. So I recommend blossoming all your spices, whether it's in an oil for a dish that would be appropriate, or you can even heat it in a pan, but I would be very careful with that. They can burn easily. So this is just going to go ahead and come up to a simmer. If you're using a curry blend, a lot of times those are made either directly from curry leaves, but they also might have a blend of other spices in them, like cumin or cinnamon, coriander. And these spices are all being researched for health benefits. They've been shown to maybe have effects in reducing inflammation, helping fight certain kinds of cancers. And so it's recommended not just for flavor, but to include these regularly in small amounts. And you can really spice up a dish a lot if you're using spices. Okay, so then in my cast iron over here, I'm gonna just toast some pistachios really quickly. You could do this in the oven as well if you wanted to. It'd be at 350 degrees and you'd wanna add a little bit of oil. But again, it's really hot here. I don't wanna turn on my oven, so I'm just gonna do it in my cast iron real quick. It won't take as much time, and I do have to really keep an eye on them to make sure they don't burn. So there's my pistachios. Roasting them is going to bring out some of their flavors, make them a little toastier. So I've got it on medium-high right now. I'm just going to give it a little bit of stir. There is no oil in here. I am cooking these dry. Okay. So this is starting to simmer a little bit. I can really smell the aroma of the spices being released. I don't want to overdo it. You can kind of see it's getting a little bit foamy in there. So that's perfect. So I'm going to work on my sauce and keep an eye on my pistachios. So I've got my little food processor right here. I have about 3 garlic cloves in there. I have kind of a little small one. So if you have small cloves, you might need a few more. Large cloves, you might only need 2. And again, you can kind of base it depending on how garlicky you like things. So I got my garlic cloves. I'm going to add in some yellow mustard. Dijon is also really good. So it's 1 tablespoon. Dijon is really good. Oops, this might be a new one. But again, I didn't have time to go grocery shopping since I came back home and realized that this was the recipe I was going to be making today. So we're going to sub in yellow mustard. Dijon just has a little bit more of a complex flavor. Yellow mustard's a little bit sweeter. All right, so just got 1 tablespoon going in there. And I'm going to add in 3 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. If you don't have apple cider vinegar, you might try red wine vinegar. White vinegar won't give you quite enough flavors. It won't be complex enough. So I'd stick with more of a flavored one. You could really play around with your pairings if you only had like a rice vinegar. Maybe you would use Worcestershire sauce instead of your mustard. Kind of thinking about what flavors complement each other. I'm just going to give this a quick pulse. There we go. And a couple of pulses. Sorry, I should have warned you to turn down your volume if you have me up high. And just make sure your garlic is getting all minced. You could also mince it before putting it in here if you like. All right, I'm going to go turn down your volume again. Okay, so now that this is generally pulsed together, it's looking a little bit creamy. I'm going to slowly add in my oil and curry powder mixture from the stove. It's had a chance to cool down a little bit, but I'm going to have it running on low as I pour it in. And a lot of food processors do have these little holes at the top here where you can pour it in. Oops. I'm dripping a little bit. Oh no. I'm just going to pause and stir my nuts. They're getting a little bit fragrant. All right, and off a little All right, so you can see, unfortunately, I am not great at pouring into this food processor, so I did spill a little bit, but it should be all right. Open this up. So this process of the adding a fat in the olive oil to a vinegar creates an emulsion, so it gets a really creamy dressing. Just gonna make sure I get all the bits out of the top, especially since I dropped so much down the sides. And I still do have a little bit of curry powder just here in the bottom, kind of maybe some of the more coarsely ground spices. So I'm just going to scrape those in. The important part is to get the vinegar and the fat blended together and not necessarily all the spices. So there we go. A nice little mess going on here. So I'm just going to set this aside for right now and get a cutting board for my nuts. So I'll be using, these are almost done. We just want them to get lightly toasted. That'll be a couple more minutes, maybe 1 more minute. So I got my beets and I'm going to pour in about half of my dressing. Give it a nice toss, get it all nice and coated. As I mentioned before, the apple cider vinegar is going to help these beets soften up, really get infused. You can see this starting to turn a really pretty yellow, and then you can also see the pink showing through. Okay. So this is just going to sit while we work on some other pieces. That way it will have a chance for the apple cider vinegar to do its action. Okay. So I'm ready to move on with my nuts. Turning that off, and I'm just going to let them cool for a sec before I move them onto my cutting board. So I'm using pistachios, but walnuts make a really great pairing with beets. A great winter dish would be with red beets and like a little bit of goat cheese. Okay, so here are my pistachios. The little papery shell fell off some of them, so I'm just going to gently separate that. Sometimes they can be a little bit tough. If they haven't fallen off the pistachio, I'm not going to worry about it. But you can see the pistachios are a little bit toasted. They're lighter brown. Okay. Finish this off. And I'm just going to give it a rough chop with my knife. This is usually the part of the class where I remember, if I haven't already told you, that please feel free to type any questions or comments into the chat. I'm happy to answer them. I am watching it as we go along live. I'm not going to chop these really fine. Just want them maybe in halves, quarters. I'll hold up a piece for you. If it's a hot day and you don't want to turn on your stove any more than necessary, you can absolutely do this with raw, untoasted pistachios. That would absolutely work. Okay. So this is about how chunky I want them. There's a couple that are still whole. I'm just going to chop real quick. Again, it's not going to be very small pieces. So I'm going to put these aside, and we're going to add them at the end. If you add them too soon, they can get a little bit soggy. And I want them to be kind of nice and crispy and toothsome and add that contrasting texture to my beets and carrots. Great. So our beets are still going to soften up a little bit. And while I do that, I'm going to show you how to cook some beet greens. I'm just going to saute them today. Be really nice and simple. You could stir them into a stew. Maybe we'll do a whole nother class on this next week. But so you can see I have quite a few beet greens. Just going to cut them into smaller pieces. And I do like to use the stems as well. I'm making sure the stems are in smaller pieces. They can be a little bit tough because they just take a little bit longer to cook than the leaves. So I'm going to make them small enough to cook. All right, just cutting through here. So this is the same with other greens like kale. You can eat the stem. Just want to cut it up a little bit. Some like kale, if it's like a really big, thick stem, you might peel it, or you might just cut it into small pieces and steam it before sauteing. This will just help it be a little bit softer. And beet greens are pretty similar to spinach, where I have this huge pile right now and they will cook down. just some smaller pieces. Let me dump out the rest of my pistachio shells because I am just going to use this pan again. And I'm going to add a little bit of olive oil. So maybe about 2 teaspoons or so. I can always add more. And we'll get that warming up. So while we're waiting for this to warm up, I'll just talk you through my thought process when I'm looking for a new recipe. So like today, when I realized I had the beautiful candy stripe beets instead of our red beets, I typed in recipes for candy stripe beets. First, I wanted to see if I could still make them into the beet soup. But then I decided, since the candy stripe beets are so pretty and so sweet, that it felt like a waste to cook them into a soup. I wanted to leave them whole so we could really enjoy them. So then when I'm looking up recipes for candy stripe beet salads, a few things that I look for just in recipes in general. I like to choose recipes with kind of minimal ingredients. Ones that I already have in my house, especially if I'm kind of planning spur of the moment. I don't want to have to run to the store. I'm going to go ahead and add these in. Just going to do big handfuls. Beautiful. So few ingredients, ones I already have. I love to find recipes where vegetables are kind of the main ingredient, the star of the show, especially if I'm cooking with something that really deserves to be highlighted. Like a lot of the seasonal produce you can find is just so delicious that it should be highlighted. All right, so I'm just coating this with the olive oil that I had in my pan. My beet greens were a little bit wet from being washed, and this is going to help kind of steam them a little bit. So I should mention that when you are peeling beets, do make sure you wash them first. Even if you get them from someone you know, it helps just remove the dirt. You don't really want any grittiness or germs in your food. All right, so this is just going to cook a little bit, and then I'm going to add in some minced garlic. So this is 2 cloves here. You could make these super garlicky if you wanted. I'm just going to go pretty simple. So finding recipes where vegetables are in the forefront. I like to look for recipes that use unsaturated fat instead of saturated fat. So this would be like an olive oil or a vegetable oil or a canola oil instead of butter. Just keep it a little bit healthier. I like to find them that use spices because, as we've talked about before on here, spices are a great way to add a lot of flavor without adding a lot of sodium, which has been linked to high blood pressure. Just looking for ways to do that. All right, so this is cooking down. I'm going to go ahead and add in my garlic now. I don't want to add my garlic in too soon because I want to still have a little bit of that kind of like bite of the garlic. It complements the beet greens really well. So it's going to get cooked. It's just not going to get kind of cooked all the way. Right. Just mixing this around. Another thing I like to think about when I'm looking for recipes is whether or not it's something that can be changed up. So even if the main ingredient is something that I or my family don't necessarily like, sometimes if I am thinking about like a specific salad or something, I might look at vegetables that I have in my fridge and see what can be swapped in, or vegetables that my family likes. So I think it can be kind of limiting if you only look for recipes that have ingredients that you know you like. It's great to try new things and then also just change up recipes and be really creative in the kitchen. Okay. I'm just going to let that cook for a couple minutes, and I'm going to show you how I prepared my carrots. So this is a carrot. I gave it a good scrub, and then I did peel out off the outer layer of my carrot. I don't always do that, but I'm preparing them into strips like this, and if you don't peel it, sometimes it can have kind of like a tough outer layer, And when you do peel it, it's more of a vibrant orange, and that's going to look really beautiful on our dish. So I'm just going to use my vegetable peeler and just do some long peels. This was 2 medium-sized carrots here. And for the beets, I had that big one that you saw me peel, and then I had about 8 of these really tiny ones. They're very small. But again, this is one that you can eyeball a little bit based on how many people you're serving. Oops, carrot peel down. Based on how many people you're serving, how many beets or how many carrots you have. And that's about it. This is then a good snacking carrot, or a reward if you have a kitchen helper. Let me just give this a stir. I don't want to overcook my greens. I think that's kind of mushy, but I think this is about done. Okay, so I'm turning that off. I hope you can see these. They've still retained a really nice bright greenness. Get you closer. So these are still really bright green. The stems have become kind of a darker pink in places. So this is about the level I want them cooked to. I've got all my carrots. I'm just going to line them up and cut them in half. I don't want these really unmanageable pieces in my salad. I think that's one of the things that really turns me off to a salad is if you've got these really big pieces and it's really embarrassing to eat in public. I make them a little more manageable. All right, so let's go ahead and take a peek at what's going on with our beets. Just mixing them up. If there's any that seem stuck together, trying to break those apart. There we go, and just get it mixed. I'm just going to go ahead and taste one of these beets. Make sure it's the texture. So it's slightly floppier than it was when it went in. You can see it has a little more give, whereas before it was a little bit stiffer. If you wait longer, it will get softer. Okay, that's perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add in my carrots. If you want them softer after tasting them, you can just let them sit a little longer. But I'm going to let them sit a little bit with the carrots and let all my flavors meld together. Go ahead and add these in, all these beautiful orange curls. Give it a good toss. I may add some more of my dressing right about now. Don't want it to be too overpowering because I do want the sweetness of the carrots and the sweetness of the candy striped beets to show through. But I do want to make sure I'm getting all that delicious curry flavors. And this dressing can be used on lots of other things. So if you do have extras, you don't use it all for this salad, you can absolutely save it. It'll be good for about a week. I recommend using it. I'm just going to drizzle a little bit more on there. And again, this part is completely to taste. You can add more, you can add less, depending on how spicy the curry powder variety you used is. You might want to add a little bit less or more. Okay. So now this is all coated. I can see that there's some dressing on kind of all of these vegetables. And it's going to be time to add in my pistachios on top. You could also, if you're taking this somewhere, leave the pistachios on the side so folks with nut allergies can enjoy them. We are all fine with nuts here, so I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle them on top. And this was about a half cup of pistachios. And then I have some nice bright green to go with this. I think tonight, my fridge was pretty bare, but I think I'm going to have this on top of some veggie burgers that I've made on here before. I made them on the sweet potato and chickpea burgers for that class. So I think I'm going to heat some of those up. So I had them frozen. So I'll heat them up. I think this will be really delicious on top of them, or even on the side, and then with my sauteed greens to really round out my plate tonight. Thank you so much for joining me tonight in making a kind of a surprise striped beet salad. I hope you go ahead and try this and enjoy it. If you have any other ingredients or seasonal vegetables that you would like to get a little bit more inspiration around, please feel free to drop it in the comment section or message us on Facebook at Cornell Cooperative Extension of Jefferson County. And I'm sorry, I know I said I was watching the chat, and I guess I did not do a really great job of that. So I wanted to, someone asked where I got this peeler. This is just a peeler. I think I probably got it at a Target or another kitchen store. Vegetable peelers are pretty inexpensive, and you can use them for a lot of things. So in last week's class, What Can I Cook with Zucchini? I showed you how to use them to make spiraled noodles or zoodles. So again, you can use them in a lot of different vegetable scenarios. All right. Well, thank you again so much for joining me, and I hope to see you all again next week.